Hi, in this lecture, we're going to wrap up the endocrine system with some additional organs. The endocrine organs we'll be looking at, we're going to start with the thymus gland. Now, the thymus gland is a gland located above the heart in the thorax. You can see this little thing right here. It's most functional in infancy through childhood, and as we get older, it gets replaced with fatty tissue and slowly atrophies and doesn't work as well. The hormone we're going to look at is called thymosin, so thymosin from the thymus gland, and it trains your T cells. So you've probably heard of your T lymphocytes before. These are white blood cells, or we call them T cells. It makes them immunocompetent. That's just a fancy word to say that they learn how to fight non-self. So when we're looking at the immune system, we have what's called self. These are cells that belong to us. And then we have non-self, which literally mean things that don't belong there. And our T cells are supposed to help find these things and destroy them. And so that's what thymosin helps to train those cells. Now, the gonads are the ovaries and the testes. Remember, the gonads are going to release those steroid hormones. They're under control of the gonadotropin. So remember that the hypothalamus releases GnRH, and that was latent. That is not released, and then when it becomes released, that's what triggers puberty. That goes to the anterior pituitary and releases FSH and LH, and these travel to the gonads to trigger the release of our hormones. So FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. That one mainly helps with the gametes, the production of the eggs, and in the testes, it's going to help produce basically the sperm, whereas LH tends to help form hormone release. So if we're looking at the gonads, let's start with the ovaries. Inside the ovaries are these circular structures called follicles, and the follicles have what's called an oocyte within them. The oocyte is the egg. Now, for a human female, once a month, one follicle enlarges, it gets bigger and bigger, and the oocyte matures. That oocyte is released, that's ovulated. Once it's ovulated, that follicle turns into what's called a corpus luteum, which is a ruptured follicle. So estrogen is made by the follicle, and as that follicle matures, so does your estrogen level. Your estrogen level will go up during the month. Once it reaches a critical point around day 14, then it's going to send feedback back to actually luteinizing hormone. LH is released, and then LH triggers the formation of the corpus luteum. It's called luteinizing hormone. So what LH actually does is it causes ovulation. When that egg is released, then that ruptured follicle becomes the corpus luteum, and it's the corpus luteum that makes progesterone. So estrogen and progesterone both come from the ovaries. Estrogen from the ovarian follicle, progesterone from the ruptured follicle called the corpus luteum. Now, estrogen is primarily involved with what's called secondary sex characteristics. So think about this as things that happen at puberty. So you get more body fat, you start to menstruate, there's body hair, there's breast development. That's all estrogen. Progesterone tends to affect the uterus and cause the uterine changes that happen during a monthly cycle. Now, both of the gonads, the ovaries and the testes, release inhibin, and inhibin's job is to go up and inhibit FSH. So it works like a negative feedback, and it turns off FSH. Now, testosterone, on the other hand, is made by the testes. Remember, it's made by these interstitial cells. The cells that are between these coiled things were called seminiferous tubules, remember. So the seminiferous tubules are making the sperm. We're focused on testosterone, which comes from the interstitial cells. And testosterone causes the secondary sex characteristics for a male. So things at puberty, increased muscle mass, deepening of the voice, the vocal cords change their shape, increased body hair. So these are things that would associate, and obviously the production of sperm. The pineal gland we looked at already, we saw this in the brain. Its nickname is the third eye because it does respond to sunlight. So the light comes in and goes past the pineal gland, and the pineal gland makes melatonin, which comes from serotonin. So it gets information through vision and through sunlight, and it's a cyclic hormone. So what happens is in the dark, that increases your levels of melatonin. So it goes up at night, but high noon, bright sunlight inhibits it. So darkness increases it, sunlight decreases it. And what it does is it makes you feel tired. So it's one of your triggers to help you sleep. So it helps you fall asleep at night. It can also make you feel hungry. They think this might be affecting puberty. They think that it's melatonin that basically inhibits GnRH. And then for some reason, melatonin levels drop and then GnRH is released and you hit puberty. But it's mainly involved with sleep, biological clock, and eating. It does seem to be an antioxidant, so it has some protection on neurons, but it does seem to be the cause of SAD, and SAD is called seasonal affective disorder. And so what happens is, or the winter blues, in the wintertime, you have a lot more melatonin. You're not out in the sun, there's less sun available, so melatonin levels stay higher, and you might feel tired and depressed. In the summer, when you're outside and there's a lot more bright sun, your melatonin levels are lower and you're going to feel better. So one of the treatments for this is actually light therapy. You can get these special lights and you can sit in front of them to help lower your melatonin levels. Now, if you have trouble sleeping, you probably take melatonin about 30 minutes before you want to go to sleep because its job is to make you feel sleepy. Adipose tissue, I'm not saying a whole lot. There's a lot of hormones that come from it. I just want you to understand that adipose tissue releases a lot of different hormones. There's over 20 different hormones and factors that cause inflammation that come from our adipose tissue. The ones we're going to look at are leptin from adipose tissue and adiponectin. These come from adipose tissue. Ghrelin is on the slide, but ghrelin actually comes from your stomach. Think about your stomach growling. So we know that leptin is made by our fat cells, and that when we release leptin, it makes us feel full, so we will not feel hungry, and it helps us burn fat. We know that adiponectin, you can see this one here, that this is another helpful hormone made by our fat cells. Higher levels are going to make us burn fat and be leaner and decrease appetite, and it decreases inflammation. So there's a lot of research in obesity. Some people had thought maybe there were issues with leptin or leptin receptors. A lot of that hasn't panned out. I think there's still a lot more questions. We know there's genetic links to this. If one parent is obese, you have a 40% chance of being obese yourself. If both parents are obese, that goes up to 80%. So clearly there's some things going on with hormones and genetics with this. The thing I wanted to mention as well was ghrelin. Remember, ghrelin is the one that makes us feel hungry. That comes from our stomach, right? Think about your stomach growling. And so with that one, we know if we're looking at body energy balance that if we have high ghrelin levels and low leptin, we tend to gain weight and be hungry more. If we have the profile where we make more leptin and have low ghrelin, that's what helps us keep us more naturally lean. And then you have this table in your notes because there's other organs that make hormones. So they're not technically endocrine organs, but they make some hormones. So I need you to know these. And a lot of these come back in AP too. So the duodenum of your small intestine, the first part of your small intestine, makes some hormones. Notice the trigger is food. So when you eat food and you digest it and it gets into your small intestine, you release the hormones. So we have gastrin, CCK, and secretin. So notice that gastrin kind of slows everything down, inhibits hydrochloric acid, whereas CCK targets the pancreas and causes it to release all those enzymes. Remember, those enzymes will digest food, so you're going to want lots of them. And it makes your gallbladder contract to squish out some bile. Secretin causes the pancreas to make a bicarb-rich juice. So this is what's going to help buffer the food when it hits your small intestine, because your stomach has a lot of hydrochloric acid and a low pH, so you'll need to neutralize that. The kidney makes EPO and calcitriol. We actually learned calcitriol previously when we studied bones. Remember that this one is going to help us absorb more calcium. This came from vitamin D, so we talked about sunlight making it. EPO is a hormone that increases the production of red blood cells. This is called your hematocrit. So when you release EPO, you have a higher hematocrit. You have a lot more red blood cells, and their job is to transport oxygen. So anytime you have low oxygen, you're going to trigger that. The heart makes what's called ANP or ANF. The A stands for atrial, and the next word stands for natriuretic factor. So a natriuretic is like a diuretic. It increases sodium loss in your urine. And so what happens is you basically pee more water out. So there's more sodium in your urine and water tends to follow it. So it decreases your blood volume and it decreases your blood pressure. In fact, ANP or ANF is an antagonist to ADH and aldosterone. It has the opposite effect. And the stomach has gastrin, which basically stimulates digestive processes. So when you eat food and have gastrin, whereas ghrelin, as we mentioned on the previous slide, is kind of like your dieter's worst nightmare. We know that it makes you hungry and it also is going to cause you to store fat. So when you diet or you restrict your food intake, that's when you release ghrelin. And we also know sleep is important, right? The magic number is 8 hours, and we know we need about 8 hours of sleep for normal leptin levels and also for normal ghrelin levels. So if you're sleep deprived or not getting enough sleep, often you'll gain weight because of that as well. So this concludes our lectures on the endocrine system.